Last week we finished the section of Leviticus, chapter 16, and Leviticus kind of pivots around chapter 16 and 17, and it depends how you want to do your outline. It does vary, but that is definitely the central verses, the one speaking about the Day of Atonement, which was significant, and chapter 17 speaking about the blood. And it'd be nice to unpack all of that, what that means today, but we won't be able to, but we'll touch on some of the things. And so the first section from chapters 1 to 16 covers something, or a section is called the public worship of the people. This morning we are going to consider from chapter 17 through to chapter 27, which covers the second section of Leviticus, which is the private worship of the people. And so how that breaks down is that in the first section, we saw how everything was done in the open at the tent of meeting. The priests were involved and nothing was done in a way that was private. Now we see from chapter 17 onwards how what is taught and what is commanded in chapter 1 to 16 impacts the private lives of the saints. There's still accountability, and there's still in a large degree of transparency, but it is how individual lives are lived on the basis of what has been taught in the first part of the book. So this is the private worship of the people, chapter 17 to chapter 27. And we will start with chapter 17, which gives certain stipulations about blood. And there's a clear division in this chapter with reference to what happens around handling blood. Number one, the way blood is dealt with defines or prescribes the place of sacrifice. So it's told in chapter, you will find in chapter 17 that it says very clearly it's not to happen outside the camp. Now, in chapter 7 is got a very difficult way of reading. It doesn't flow. That almost seems to imply that you can offer outside the camp, but clearly it's not prescribing that, because the point of that first part of chapter 17 is that no offering should be done outside the camp, but at the ends of the tent, because that's where the blood needs to be placed on the altar so the sacrifice can actually be accepted by the Lord and accomplish what it is designed to do. So the place is prescribed very clearly in chapter 17. And if and the reason why that has been done, mainly from what we can see from the text, is that these people came out of Egypt with their inclination to indulge in other forms of sacrifice. That's what they've learned in Egypt. And so there was a tendency that they could, or trying to prevent them from doing, sacrifices to goat gods. That was not something that they were unfamiliar with. And so chapter 17 of Leviticus prevents them from doing something secretly out of the eyes of the priests particularly, and out of the eyes of the people who would be faithful believers, and then do sacrifices and not offer the blood as it should be done. So because you are compelled to offer the sacrifices within the camp at the tent of meeting, they cannot then offer up unauthorized sacrifice. So there's a control around that. And the goat gods will not get the glory and worship that's due to the only true God. This is very clear. And if they do not do that, if they continue to disobey that, there is a penalty. And we find this word blood guilt, and it kind of sounds pretty mysterious, but basically what it's saying is that they will be guilty of handling blood in a way which was not prescribed. And there's a penalty for that. They be cut off from the people. So it is very clear from Leviticus chapter 17, the first part, that they have to offer in a certain way. It's not a free for all. You have to do what is prescribed, so that number one, the Lord is honored. It's for him that you're doing the offering, and it's to him you're doing the offering, and the purpose of the offering then is achieved. So it's very clear that the place is prohibited, or prescribed rather, as dependent on because of the significance of the blood that needs to be sprinkled on the altar. Secondly, there's a prohibition about eating. So we've gone through all the sacrifices, and we have seen that some things are burnt up completely, like on the burnt offering, as in the burnt offering. But there are other times when portions of sacrifices are for eating. There's memorial portions to the Lord, and the balance is given to the priest as food. And so they are able to eat of any animal that's been sacrificed on the altar, any animal that qualifies to sacrifice on the altar. But there's one thing they cannot do. They cannot eat the blood. They cannot drink the blood. The animal's going to be completely drained so that the blood is not part of their dietary system, of their menu. So in verses 10 to 12 of that chapter, we see that the sacrifices are there, so the blood is sprinkled on the altar for atonement, and that's the only purpose the blood is provided for through the sacrificial system. It's not provided for anything else except that it may meet the demand that's required so that the offerer can be atoned. Number two, what about if they if they hunt and they kill an animal in the hunt, and the animal qualifies as a clean animal that's clean to them, they're able to eat it. But if it's out in a hunt and it's clean, then they have to deal with it in a particular way. But if they hunt for something and they catch an animal that is not clean, that they cannot eat, then they have to bury that blood. They can't bring it back to the tent. They've got to bury the blood. The blood is not part of any part of that process. So you can't shoot a kudu and you can make nice blood wars with it. Doesn't work. You have broken what they commanded to do. And number three, some animals may have died because of natural causes. Those are unclean. They can't eat them at all. So chapter 17 speaks clearly about the significance of the blood from the animal that's sacrificed. It'd be nice to take chapter 17 and take it to Hebrews and try and show you correlations, but we can't do that. It would be great, but unfortunately it's not going to be possible. Maybe at some later date we can. But you need to understand it more and more as Hebrews. In fact, you won't understand Hebrews much unless you see the offerings in Leviticus and the significance of the blood. And so, why is it so important that they deal carefully with the blood? God has made a clear stipulation. It's because the life is in the blood. And that has a huge significance when we come to not temporal offerings, but the one and only permanent offering, which is Jesus Christ himself. And so, while we in a modern 21st century Western society, they see no problem with having blood included in our meals some along the way. And listen very carefully, a rare steak is not eating the blood, right? That thing's been drained for 21 days, so it better not have blood in it. But it's tissue meat, it gets pink, so sometimes people get up concerned, am I eating blood? But the point is, this was something that was applied very clearly to the Jewish system of sacrifice. And the life was in the blood, and that was significant. And they need to understand that because it impacted everything else that they did around sacrifices and how they handled meats and how they ate their food. Any questions? No? All right. The next slide is dealing here with chapters 18 to 20. So, again, a huge slice. Can't cover this all. So I'm going to try and address some things in here. But this is a little bit of a difficult chapter to address in an audience like this because some very sensitive issues it deals with. So the language is going to be careful. And I want to be cognizant of that without diminishing the impact of what has been taught in chapter 18 to 20. And chapter 18 to 26 is a portion commonly known as the Holiness Code. And this is the code that by which the Jews lived as they lived a life of holiness or attempted to or were required to do. So I want to be a little careful of the language, but I need to touch on some things that is definitely important. And so chapter 18 really speaks about what they must not do. It clearly specifies things that they are prohibited from doing, they must not do. And that mainly revolves around sexual action. So that is the reason why I want to just be careful how I unpack this. And so we don't find that some sensitive ears are challenged. So number one, what you must not do, verses 16 to 18. You must not have any form of relation with a close relative. And in this section, Moses gives you every conceivable permutation of what a relative would be. He goes, there's no loophole. There isn't a single loophole in what Moses prescribes or defines as being your close relative. And as you go, that you realize that the times that we find ourselves living in now, our people not only come close to doing the wrong thing, they have overrun these boundaries in so many different levels. So, number one, the law of holiness required that you cannot have any form of sexual relationship, action with a close relative. It was prohibited. It was something that they could not even find a way around. So every conceivable permutation was included, and the provision, this was for the prohibition of incestuous sexual activity. And it's clear. Now we know that that was something that was broken in many, many ways, but it was clear from God's perspective that He is very clear as to how this activity takes place. I've given you from verse 6 to verse 18, but verse 18 is kind of a bit of a difficult verse. Verse 18, really, it could go with the first part, it could go with verse 19, and there's a reason why I say that, because in verse 18 it says, "And you shall not take a woman as a rival wife to a sister, uncovering her nakedness while her sister is still alive." So this is not a direct relative. So perhaps that's why we would include it rather with verses 19 onwards. But it does speak about the uncovering of a nakedness, which kind of ties it back to verses 6 to 17. So it depends who you read. They put it out anywhere but there, but certainly it's included in this list of things that are not, which they're prohibited from doing. So the interesting part of I would have placed verse 18. I've changed my mind after I read that, after I did the slide, with verse 19 for the very specific reason. From verse 19 onwards, we find a list of sexual acts that has a progressive level of deviancy. Now, I'll read them to you, just so that you are aware of them. So let's leave verse 18 where it is. But from verse 19, we find it speaks about a man not having any relations with a woman while she is in a menstrual cycle. In this chapter 15, it says something slightly different. In chapter 15, it says that it's an action that's unclean if it's done under certain conditions. But in this section, it is not just a man lying with his woman, it's a man uncovering her nakedness. And that term, uncovering the nakedness, if you read the first few verses, 6 to 18, you'll soon realize that that term is used almost exclusively to indicate a prohibited, not approved, a sinful sexual act. The Bible uses various terms to speak about this. For instance, you will find that it says in Genesis, Adam knew his wife. We know what that means. Adam was able to have a relationship with his wife in a sexual way. In this chapter, in chapter 15, it says, "A man shall not lie with a woman." And that word lie is used on both sides, but in that case, it refers to a man who has the legitimate right of lying with a woman, but because she has a monthly cycle, it becomes unclean. He's got to just wait his period out to the offering, and he goes on. In this case, in chapter 17, verse 19, if he's guilty of this, it's not just unclean, and I'll show you why later on. Number two, the next thing, is that, let me go back, is that you should not take your neighbor's wife. And that's worse than the first one. Why do I say it's worse than the first one? Simply for this reason. If you have this relationship with your neighbor's wife, you break at least 2, maybe 3 commandments. So it's not just an action you've taken that is prohibited. You actually break 3 commandments. So when a man has, in this case, uncovers the nakedness of his neighbor's wife, what 3 commandments does he break? A command against immorality, a command against coveting your neighbor's wife. Number 3, do not steal. So in many cases, in this case, many explorers see that this is you stealing the neighbor's wife. Remember the story of David and Bathsheba? He took that woman from a man, and Nathan's rebuke speaks something to that about him taking his sheep that didn't belong to him. So that may not be that entirely, but I think it does give you a number of commandments that's broken. So you're now gone from just sleeping at the wrong time of the month to sleeping with your neighbor's wife. Then the third thing, as it gets worse, is giving of the children to Molech. Now, this is it's a devious sacrifice process, and it's unclear as to all the details, but certainly children are involved, and children are being offered to a god in a sacrifice. And if depending where you read, there could be sexual activity attached to this. It's included here, so I am quite prone to believe that there was some kind of sexual activity attached to this. And so it's got worse from just coveting your neighbor's wife and being involved with her. You now are offering your children to Molech. And then the next thing is that is a progressive in this prohibition in chapter 18, is that homosexuality. This is that one of those bad verses where you're not allowed to use if you're talking about homosexuality. Well, guess what? It's right here. And so it got progressively worse. And that ends with that list of progressive deviances ends with bestiality. Wow. So it's got worse and worse and worse and worse. And these are the things that they're told they must not do because they had been exposed to all of this in the nations where they come from or the nations they are going to. So if you think that this is maybe something that's way down the line, let me read you a quick quote from a post done in 2021 on a site. And this is what the comment is made by this person who is challenging this. He says, how is bestiality generally considered bad, but eating meat is okay? The latter seems to be definitely more harmful to animals. So understand, the standards that are being applied are absurd. If you are indulging in the first part, but you're a vegan, you're okay. But if you don't do the first part, if you abstain from that, and you eat a pork chop, you are being cruel to animals. So understand that these laws and these deviances that's been outlined in Leviticus plays itself out in the world today. And many of these things we can tie into modern day applications if we have the time. But certainly they are there. And the children of Israel could not live holy lives and do this. So any inclination of this in the life of a believer, whether it's an Old Testament believer or a New Testament believer, means that you're not living a holy, sanctified life. It goes against, it's the antithesis of a holy life. Then it also deals with pervasive consequences. So there are consequences for committing these things, what they must not do. First of all, the nations become unclean. And secondly, the land becomes unclean. Now think about that in today's context. Number one, notice this firstly, that you will notice in Leviticus, every time there is a commandment given, a prohibition given, a warning laid down, God will keep coming back to the land. And you will see that later on, because he says the land is mine. And we've covered this in many ways from this pulpit already. The land doesn't belong to the Jews. They are merely beneficiaries of the blessing and the covenant God has made with them, but the land ultimately belongs to God. And it's given to the Jews as part of his covenant with them. But ultimately, the land comes up many times because God has a certain perspective of the land, which is his. But hold on a second. It says that if you do these things, the consequences are pervasive. Not only are you affected as the culprit, the doer of the sin, but you affect the nations around you, nations from which you come, plus the land. So think about this. Today we are told so often, what I'm doing is not sinful. It's my body, it's my choice. I'm not harming anybody. There's no victims. Well, when it comes to abortion, we know there are victims, but think about the transgender movement. And I hear this so many times from talk hosts where they say to people who are proponents of transgenderism, I have a problem with you trying to have a child change its gender. I don't care what you do as an adult, as a consenting adult. That's fine, because what you do is your own business. No, it's not. What he does, or she does, or whatever they see themselves as doing, they infect the entire nation. We are not left uncontaminated, which is why we need to resist these things. We need to not be assimilated. We need to voice what we voice on the basis that it's what God says, and we'll say, are you stupid? Why are you saying that this is antiquated? We have to give them the same answer that the Jews had to give when they were asked, why don't you eat these animals? Because we serve a holy God. And our God is holy, and his word is immutable. So yes, it's not something that just happens in private. It has a long-term effect, or rather a far-reaching effect on everybody who comes in contact with the person committing the sin in some way or another. Not only is the nation contaminated, but so is the land, which is why when they go into the land, they need to redeem the land. They need to have it sanctified. Their offerings made own on that. And that will come up in the next book, Numbers and Deuteronomy, as we get there. So that's what they must not do. So what must they do? There's something that they must do. God has always given them clear guidance as to when it's something that you mustn't do. It's what you must do. In the New Testament, we see it as putting off and putting on. In this case, don't do, but do. Not do, but do. Okay. What they must do. Verse 2. You shall be holy. And remember that that's in chapter 19. Chapter 19 is that chapter in which we find that wonderful statement, you must be holy because I am holy. So verse 2 says of chapter 19 that you shall be holy. Number 3, what must you do? You shall love your neighbor. So everything that happens in chapter 18 is you're acting against your neighbor because you're two parties involved in almost every one of those things, if not more. You are not loving your neighbor. You're actually hating your neighbor and hating yourself and hating God. But it's clear that the opposite is that you should love your neighbor. Verse 18. And the third thing that you must do, you must keep my commandments. You must keep my statutes. You must not break my statutes. Verse 19. So it's clear that God gives them what you don't do. And they can say, well, you're just telling us what we can't do. What can we do? Well, that's what you must do. And so it's a very balanced layout of this particular activity that impacts the lives of the people of Israel. Chapter 20 really is he looks back at chapters 18 and 19, and as the chapter goes along, it attaches certain consequences to various parts of chapter 18 and chapter 19. And I'm not going to go through all of those because there are a lot, but it is certainly sections where they are rebuked for doing that things which were not supposed to do, and where they find they are rewarded for those in which they are doing. So chapters 18, 19, and 20 go together, and the chapter 18 and 19 prescribes what is allowed and not allowed, and chapter 20 tells you the consequences of not doing that or doing that. Any questions on that? I'm going this fast. I know I'm going to pick up my pace very shortly, and I'm not going to cover every single thing, but I do think some things we have to touch on. So we've done the holiness of the people. So we've covered this first chapters, 18 and 19 and 20, the holiness of the people. But remember, God never requires the people to be holy and let the priests get away. If anything, he lays a greater responsibility and burden on the priests to be holy. So, holiness is required of the priests. Regulations for every aspect of the life and action of every priest. This is a chapter which, again, it has a tremendous amount of detail. And just to go through that chapter is going to be it's difficult. But I want to point out something that's important that when you do go home and read it, understand this clearly. When it came to the nation of Israel, their obedience to God, their obedience to living according to the commandments, the purpose of their holy life would be that they are a witness to the Gentile nations around them of God's holiness. Deuteronomy 4:3 verse 8 tells you that exactly. You'll get there. So the Jewish nation, they were a witness to the nations around them of who their God is by the way they lived. The priest, on the other hand, according to chapters 21 and 22 of Leviticus, the obedient priest would be a witness to Israel of God's holiness. So they would be the ones who, as it were, established a benchmark in line with God's holiness. And so they are required to live as priests. And chapters 21 and 22 covers every aspect of the life of the priest. There's not a single aspect of his life that is not touched on that needs to be holy. He needs to be holy in everything. And as is unpacked, not only must he be holy, but so must his family be. No blemish must be seen upon his life. And if something arises, he's got to make sure that is accounted for quickly so that the priesthood remains what they have been designed to be, the go-between between God and the people. Remember, the people come to the priests with an offering, which they kill. The priest would take the blood, and the priest would offer the blood by sprinkling the altar as they offer it to God. And when God would want to speak and deal with the people, either came through Moses or through Aaron, and the priest became a link, a transition, a conduit between God and the people. So it was critical that the priests remain holy more than just the people had. Well, let me say to the same degree, but so much more. So think about this. If that's typical of the priests in the Old Testament, how does it apply in some way to us, that particular aspect? What does 1 Peter 2 say about us? Well, there are many things it says. We are a holy nation. What? Royal priesthood. We are all priests. And so therefore, while we do not live under this particular Levitical law at this point, the implication as you go to Peter is that we need to live the kind of lives we do so that our very holiness of our lives, the sanctification of our lives, does not enhances the way we evangelize. That the lack of that does not work against us attempting to evangelize the world. So the life of a priest is extremely critical as far as Leviticus is concerned. Chapter 23. Any questions? Sorry, Carl, looks like you want to ask a question. No, you're smiling at me. Sorry, Carl, I didn't mean to call you out. Quickly, and these I'm going to just give you the lists because there are many. So chapter 23 speaks about the holy convocations. What are the holy convocations? There they are. These are the special feasts, the high days, the Sabbath, the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of First Fruits, the Feast of Pentecost, or also called the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles, also called the Feast of Booths. That's right, somebody said that. So when you read those, just remember what you're reading. So these are required feasts, and those are the references in chapter 23 of this has to be done. God doesn't leave the people of Israel without a clear map, blueprint, guideline for their lives. And these feasts continually bring them back to what is required of them as a chosen nation. And remember that very early in Leviticus, God says that they are a holy priesthood. He wants to make the entire nation priests, but they're not able to get there, and so he works with the priesthood, but he keeps bringing them back to his holiness and the requirements. And how easy is that to do that through a time of celebration? Think of it. If you ask somebody to go and do something that is tedious, they don't go. Even though it's required, and I'm not going to highlight anything that we do in this church that may be tedious and required, but just have a potluck or a braai. Guess what? Because it's something that's attractive, that it's around food, you tend to go there. So these feasts, through their annual calendar, kept them coming back. The Lord would draw them back because to be part of that feasts, they had to be recognized. They could not participate if they had not repented of any sins. They could not participate if they were not able to bring the correct form of sacrifices, and they could not do that unless they came to the priesthood. So the convocations continually throughout the year would keep them coming back, going back to God, so that they could see not how well they kept the laws, but how holy He is. Because all of these feasts unpack the holiness of God, and it'd be nice to tie all of this into how that is reflected in the life of Christ. But again, we can't go there. One of the Old Testament scholars in this church can pick it up sometime and do that for us. So, chapter 23 covers these convocations. Any questions? I'll say this as to you for an assignment, those of you who are looking at this. Remember I said earlier in my first talk that not all the sacrifices disappear, that some will be practiced into the millennium. Well, these feasts, some will not be and some will be. And I think maybe you should go see if you can find out what they are, and we can have a talk about that sometime over coffee. So some things will pass because they have served their purpose in a dispensation. Some of these are carried over because they have a significant point of worship and acknowledgement of God's holiness. Chapter 24, statutes and stoning. Statutes and stoning. This chapter almost seems to be stuck in between chapter 23 and 24. It almost jars at you as you read what's happened in chapter 23, and then you read this, it's like this seems to be stuck in for no purpose, appearing to break that flow from chapter 23 to 25, which does flow on very easily. But while that may be what people think, I want to be careful because this is God's inspired word, and God doesn't just stick things in to fill up space because there was nothing to put in that space. So there's a reason for this, and we can keep looking at whatever it is. It's not clear from the text. And though it's seemingly unrelated, this narrative section is sandwiched between two legal sections, almost out of place. But whatever the reason Moses had for putting it here, it certainly is not out of place. And I want to just point out perhaps two things that are arguable that why it is here, is that in, sorry, let me go there. Verse 1 to 4, it speaks about the golden lampstand with pure olive oil. So just stay with me. And number 2, it speaks about the golden table with bread and flour. Now, this is something which is interesting. I'm not going to tell you that it is there, but the chapter before that just ends with offering of first fruits. It talks about the fruits that they would bring as a recognition that the Lord has blessed them. Offering of first fruits is part of that last offering in chapter 23. Olive oil and fine flour would be some of the things that they'd be using in that kind of offering. And what's significant here, we don't know, but that does seem to flow out of the previous chapter. The other thing that is significant, the golden lampstand gives light, and the golden table provides food. And without trying to stretch a connection, I'll tell you why I think this is actually quite strongly arguable, is that, remember, there's two things that sustain the people of Israel in the desert. What was that? Pillar of fire and the manna. Light at night, warmth, and manna. Why do I think that could be significant? Because remember how unappreciative, how disgruntled, how they complained about the blessings of God in the wilderness. And God judged them, but God continued to sustain them. The very next portion in this narrative is about a seemingly strange story about a blasphemous sojourner. We find there's a person who lives amongst the Jews, the people of Israel. His mother's a Jew, his father's an Egyptian, so he's not a Jew, he's a sojourner, because it calls him a sojourner at the end of this chapter. And he, in some form or another, is at the center of a problem in the camp, and he's judged. And this chapter is quite interesting when we see how it unpacks, because it speaks about the fact that the sojourner speaks about the nature of his crime in verses 10 to 16, that I'll read it to you very quickly. And the Israelite woman's son and a man of Israel fought in the camp. They had fighting which they should not have had. They should have been loving their neighbor, right? So they brought fighting into the camp. And so they didn't know what to do with this man. And in verses 13 to verse 23 gives you the punishment. And here's how the Lord frames that punishment. I'll read it very quickly. Then the Lord said to Moses, bring out of the camp the one who cursed, and let all who heard him lay their hands on his head, and all the congregation stone him, and speak to the people of Israel, saying, whoever curses his God shall bear his sin. Whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him, the sojourner as well as the native. When he blasphemes the name, he shall be put to death. Then verses 17 to 23 gives you the punishment, and it's the punishment which we normally call an eye for an eye, or a tooth for a tooth. Tooth for a tooth. And it says at the end, in verse 23, so Moses spoke to the people of Israel, and they brought out of the camp the one who had cursed, and stoned him with stones. Thus the people of Israel did as the Lord commanded Moses. So this man cursed the name, it caused a fight, and he was stoned. And it says that the Lord prefaces with saying, whatever that person does, his punishment will be commensurate. It will be of the same, in keeping with his crime. The punishment would fit the crime. This is something which we have a problem with today, when people don't understand that when you commit a crime, there is a consequence that has been divinely defined. So when you steal, in the case of the Jews, they had to give back what they stole, plus pay extra as a fine to what they did. If you killed, you forfeited your life. There was no such thing as rehabilitation. There were no jails. There were no psychoanalysis. There were no groups, what they call them, counseling groups, counseling sessions. There was no AA Anonymous. Your crime, your infringement, your breaking of the law was dealt with swiftly and according to what God had commanded. The crime would be dealt with by a fitting punishment. I would like to have gone into a comment made by someone read online who does this a psychologist, who says that there's nothing that we do in this world that justifies us imprisoning criminals. We should deal with them as damaged people and provide medical and mental help outside of a confining place like a prison, no matter what it is. Even murder is because something needs to be dealt with in a man's mind and not put him into prison. So that's the antithesis of what God has said, right? Any questions on that? It's a chapter which seems to be stuck in for no reason, but it is there. And I think it does unpack a bit as we look at what's happening. Because remember, God has just told them to live holy lives. If you don't live holy lives, there are consequences. He shows now to Moses in this chapter a very clear way of how a breaking of a law or even committing a sin has a commensurate punishment. So they should beware. If they do something which God has said do not do, then they should expect to have punishment and not complain that the Lord is this. What did Cain say? This burden is more than I can bear. No, the burden that you bear because of God's judgment on any man, because of the sins committed in the face of God's holiness, is never more than you can bear. It's the right judgment by a holy God who can do no wrong. So, I know that we live in a world and a time when this is difficult to understand. We are told that we have become more refined, more civilized, a more understanding of things that the people in antiquity did not understand. We're more knowledgeable. Therefore, our prisons are more full. Suicides have gone up. There's more mental issues. And so apparently the solution we apply is not working. It's a placebo for what should be dealt with in a very different way. Chapter 25, the Sabbath year and the Jubilee year. This is a list of something very specific in the lives of Israel. And this is really very, very important to understand, because today we're talking about, so let's deal with the Sabbath first. There's a separation between the verses 1 to 7, and there's a chapter because the Sabbath year was something that happened every 7 years, and it was so that there could be respite for those who were indigent. So during that year, the Sabbath year, the field had to be left as it is, and those who were poor and needy were able to come and eat from the field. The field was left fallow so it could recover itself, and this was rotational crop farming way before we thought about it in the modern world. Those who were unable to feed themselves in the Sabbath year could eat, and that was respite. Respite means it's a short rest from what was a normal activity so that it could be a benefit to both the people who would benefit from the crop, plus the field would benefit as it would rejuvenate itself over a year. So the next year, it's able to do crops again. So that Sabbath year was very clear and was open to any Jew in the nation. And then we have the Jubilee year. Now, the Jubilee year happened at the end of 49 years, weeks of years. And the 50th year after the 49th year, the year thereafter, would be a Jubilee year. And that would be a time to reset everything. We talk about the Great Reset, right? The World Economic Forum think they created something new. They're stupid. They're way behind. God had his own reset. He did a reset on the Day of Atonement for the year. He does a reset on the Day of Jubilee for whatever transpired in 50 years behind that. And this reset is essential to understand. It's important. It affects commerce and trade, verses 8 to 12, the selling and buying of crops. When it came to the Jubilee year, things had to be reset so that the person who was selling crop or benefit from that selling crop, they would even out their accounts and he'd go back to the land that he owned. So this was about crops and land being rented for producing crops. And there was a transaction taking place for the 49 years. Year 50, the accounts get reset. I'm not sure we can apply that accounting principle to our books in this church, but they could, because that was God's decree on them. Number 2, verses 13 to 34, the Jubilee of land and houses. If you had a house that was sold to someone and the house was outside the city wall and you sold it to him because you couldn't pay him what you owed him, when it comes to the year of Jubilee, he's got to give your house back to you. The house belongs to your family. So if you use your house as collateral, if you use your house to pay off a loan, pay off a debt for 49 years, if you still had it alive at the end of 49 years, that house, your 50 is going to be given back to you without any fees being charged or penalties paid. So your early redemption of your fixed deposit doesn't incur any additional costs. It's given back. Number 3, verses 35 to 38. Loans are to be just. So this is not quite just a part of the Jubilee year, but it falls within that context of fairness and being a good neighbor to your brother. So as far as a Jew was concerned, if you loan your Jewish brother money and you loan him 100 rand, all you can get back from him at the end of 49 years is 100 rand. No interest charged on the money loan. You gave him money to help him out of his need. He returns the money that was rightfully yours, and that's all that takes place. And verse 39 to 55 talks about slaves being released. A brother who has worked, a Jewish man who worked as a hired hand for a sojourner, who then be redeemed by either his brothers or by himself, if he had them all, and he'll be released from his enslavement and become a free man again. So when people start telling you that the Bible supports slavery, go take them here. It doesn't. Okay.